This video, I'll be taking you behind the scenes into my exclusive coaching session with one of the world's top heads-up specialists, Kevin Rabichow. Known for his elite decision-making and his ability to dominate on the toughest tables, Kevin has mastered the art of one-on-one poker at the highest level. Together, we'll dive deep into the nuances of heads-up play and explore how to build custom strategies within GTO Wizard to outmaneuver even the sharpest opponents. Whether you're refining your skills or looking to unlock new levels of strategy, this session will equip you with the tools to elevate your game. I know I had a few mind-blowing moments. Let's dive in. What's up, guys? We're here today with Kevin Rabichow. Me and Kevin are going to get deep into the two-card Pot Limit Omaha Heads Up Lab. And when I think about coaches out there, one of the first people that came to mind was Kevin. So we got together. We're going to do this session, and we're going to go over all about heads-up poker. I've been playing a lot of heads-up poker. I played tens of thousands of hands over these past couple months. So it's going to be nice to get an actual coaching session from you, Kevin.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I was just saying, I don't know that I can think of anyone who's trained as much as it sounds like you've been training. So happy to be able to show you some stuff, and also excited to hear what you've learned about heads up from the trainer.
Cool. Yeah. I'm glad you gave me these drills already. I've been practicing a lot of your drills, and yeah, I'm excited. I'm just excited. I never asked anybody any questions about heads up theory. Most content's all 6-max or 9-handed or theoretical stuff. So there's very few heads up content creators out there. You're one of the few. So now that the fans get to hear about everything. So let's get into it.
All right.
You want to talk a little about your heads up background, because I know that you play tournaments, you play cash games, you do 6-max, you coach everybody, you basically seems like you can play everything. So what's your relationship with heads up poker?
Yeah. Heads up was my game like for almost a decade, I would say. So from 2009 until, let's call it 2018 or 2019, like there was a lot more places to play heads up. There was a lot more heads up action on the internet, and especially in those like earlier years, I was just playing heads up no limit as my full-time job. I feel pretty lucky that was the game that I learned first, because what you end up having is all these transferable skills from playing really wide ranges, playing every single hand, playing the exploit game against one opponent, really learning the psychology of your opponent. I took away a lot of skills, I think, from playing it full time that I now get to use in live poker or in tournament poker, right? So what it's been like lately is that every now and then an opportunity to play heads up comes up. Maybe it's the Legend Showdown at Run It Once Poker a few years ago. Maybe it's Doug Polk having an open challenge at the Lodge, right? These big opportunities to play heads up surface every now and then. And it's like, well, I have 10 years of experience. I just brush up a little bit, use a little bit of modern study, a little bit of modern resources like GTO Wizard. And I feel like with that background, I can come in and be one of the best heads up players in the world, even though there aren't that many people who are playing heads up in general, like routinely, right? And then every now and then people are interested in learning heads up because they've either got a private game that they want to play, they have a home game where they can get action heads up, they want to start tables in 6-max, they want to finish tournaments where all the big money is. So there's all these like little parts of the game where people get to play heads up that I think gets overlooked. And every now and then I get the chance to teach those people how to be really good at the format.
Yeah, that makes sense. I remember you being a full-time heads-up player, and then, like you said, the games sort of evolved, the poker sites evolved, the ability to play heads-up evolved. Then you got more into tournaments, and you got more into coaching, you got more into other formats as well, too. So it does seem like, to me, when I learned heads-up, it's most like Pot Limit Omaha to me, because you can play a lot of hands, you can play every hand, and the major difference between this and 6-max for me is that you can just play a lot more hands, you can make more bluffs, you can call down with weaker pairs. Whereas at 6-max against good players, oftentimes you got to play very tight. So that's what really appealed to me to heads up. And I've just kind of been obsessed with it for the past couple of years, and just playing it with all the programs and trainers, and there's bots online you can play against. So I've been pretty obsessed with it. There really isn't a place to play for, unless you're starting tables, like you said, or private games or different things like that. But I think that in the future, it's going to be very valuable to know how to play heads up poker. So I'm staying focused on it for the foreseeable future. Is one of the things I'm learning.
Nice. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. I hope that heads up keeps getting played. I hope that new opportunities to play keep showing up, because I think it's a great format. It's like, it's the most sport-like, the most like pure competition format, right? Yeah. I'm glad you're.
What do you think the
glad you're
biggest
taking an
difference
interest.
between heads up and heads up and six max are?
I mean, I guess I could think about like what the challenges that say, like, so I've coached a fair number of six max players who are coming to me trying to get better at their heads up game. So from that point of view, I can think of some of the big gaps. One major difference, I think, is that in six max, all these opportunities come up where you just take for granted that you have the better range, right? Oh, I'm going to bet my whole range on this board in this spot because I just have the stronger range. I was playing from under the gun and they're on the button, or they're in the big blind. Of course I have the stronger range. And it's so rare in heads up that happens. Like, it's so uncommon that one player has a significant advantage against the other. It's just like everyone's playing everything. Everyone has so many hands. Well, I'm saying everyone, both of you have so many hands, and you have to play with more, I don't want to say caution, but you have to play with more like finesse. You have to play with more nuance, right? There's so many spots where it's just like, we both have everything. You got to play good, well-rounded poker. And I think that six max players or players coming from other formats, they let that, they forget that sometimes. And this just goes back to the fundamental difference of the fact that you're playing way wider ranges, way more aggressively on average than you are in six max.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing that is noticed. It took me, because I learned heads up hold'em first, and then when I started playing six max, you basically have to play so much tighter at six max than heads up. And heads up, you can call down in some spots with third pair, call down in some spots with fourth pair, call down some spots with fifth pair. You get to value bet your low pairs often as well too, and depending on what the run out is. So you have to be very comfortable calling three bets, light four betting, three betting a lot out of position with weak hands, and then playing potentially really big pots with these weak top pairs and weak second pairs. So I noticed for me, you can't just really sit around. You could sit around and maybe nut putt a little bit, but there's just so many hands and so many spots, and you're going to be facing so much aggression that you have to be comfortable with all these different parts of your range and with basically playing any single hand as well too. So it definitely takes a lot to get used to, versus six max where you always have top pair, top kicker, or you have nut flush draw when you get a lot of money in, or you have a set when you get a lot of money in. You know, it's just such a different game than six max and heads up.
Just not.
I get into the pre-flop heads up fundamentals and break down the ranges.
Yeah. So why don't we look at kind of the details of exactly what we're describing, right? So how different the opening ranges, the three betting ranges, all the different spots that you're going to be playing pre-flop are compared to a game like six max. The first obvious thing that, well, you know, let's describe the structure very quickly. We're playing 100 big blinds deep. We're not playing with an ante. This is your typical heads up cash format, right? The format that I would have played most often online. And you pretty much want to be comfortable on the button playing every single hand, because yes, in GTO and what we're looking at right now is kind of the equilibrium solution. You're not playing every single hand, but you're very close to doing it, right? It's not a big mistake to play every single hand. You're extremely close to playing every hand. So right away, both players are reacting to the fact that the first in, the button, is going to try to play almost everything.
So you're basically just playing 80% of your hands. You're not, would you fold these bottom parts of your range ever? Or, once you get more experience, are you just comfortable opening those? Or if you're playing against a weaker player, are you just playing all the hands? Or, how would you think about it? Are you just kind of trying to go off of this chart for the most part?
If I'm playing someone who I know is tough, like I'm playing someone where I understand that they've studied the game, then I'm just pretty much going to come out with this strategy, because I don't think I can do a lot better. But if I'm playing against someone who's anywhere below the top, so 99.9% of people that you're going to come across in a heads up game, I would try something. Like I would just go in there and try a strategy that's going to be to my advantage. One option would be to just raise every button and see if it goes wrong, right? My first thought is, a lot of players don't 3-bet enough. A lot of players are not going to punish that. So let's just come out and raise every button and see if they force it to be a mistake. Some of the worst mistakes that we can make are going to be, the EV of raising like 3 deuce offsuit is losing 0.15 big blinds. The EV of raising 7 deuce offsuit is losing 0.2 big blinds. It doesn't cost us that much if we're wrong, but if we're right and they're playing too passively, too weak in the big blind, we make a lot. I've also played with the sizing sometimes. Like maybe you just want to min raise 100% of the time until they show you that it's a mistake. Maybe if you notice something about how, if you expect them to be a horrible player on the other side of things, you could come out and raise really big and not play all these bottom hands where you can see the EV number on screen is like 0.05 or lower. So I'm very willing to deviate here. But I think in general, the goal is to play as many hands as you can.
Mm-hmm. So if then we raise the button here 2.5, and then how does the big blind react? And this is where, to me, heads up gets really interesting and so much different than other forms of Texas Hold'em.
Yeah. So this is, let's call it the baseline expectation for what the big blind needs to do to play well. This is, first, again, let's start with the sizing. The assumption is that the 3-bet sizing is 12.5 big blinds. This isn't the strategy that they have to play, but if it is the size they're using, they've got to 3-bet 22% of the time, which is a lot. And you can see the mix of all the, uncomfortable offsuit hands. Like there's a lot of hands in here that don't necessarily want to 3-bet, but they get the frequency up. There's a lot of hands over here that don't necessarily want to 3-bet, but they get the frequency up. And the defense, obviously, as you can tell, this is, I believe, a rake-free simulation. So some of these weakest calls might be slightly losing in a raked game. But if someone's playing less than like 65 to 70% of hands in the big blind, I'm flagging them as too tight, and I'm going to raise every button.
Mm-hmm. And then why does it have it 3-betting these queen 3, queen 4 suited, 8 deuce suited occasionally, the king 6, the king 4s, the jack 7s, the 10 7s? So why does it decide to split its range with like that?
Yeah, so there's a couple dynamics at play to keep in mind, and the beautiful thing and kind of the simple thing about heads up is that it's almost always about what's happening in the other player's range. So like it's not particularly abstract, I find, in most cases. It's just like, what is the reaction that we're expecting, and how does that benefit or hurt us, right? So it might help, I'll tease ahead a little bit to the reaction to the 3-bet, but let's think, what would happen if we faced a 4-bet? So we face further aggression, right? If we 3-bet and we face a 4-bet, the hands that are going to get hurt, the hands that are going to fold and have pretty reasonable equity are right here and right here. Yeah, like you can see that there's these hands that they made the 3-bet, they faced the 4-bet, and now they're in pain. Now it's like, I had such a good hand heads up, I faced 4-bet, and now I have to fold away this equity that I really didn't want to fold away. So generally speaking, when this is the strength of your hand, you try to not put yourself in that spot, right? You try to just flat. So everything coming back to this 3-betting range here, everything kind of in between the stuff that everything that's kind of in between the 3-bets that you just called out and the 3-bets that are clearly strong for value, all the in-between stuff is calling. All the in-between stuff wants to call because it just wants to it wants to see a flop. It wants to run its equity, right? So this is something you see even outside of heads up, but I think this is just the application of it here is like, okay, we want to play really aggressively. We want to have 3-bet bluffs, but we don't want to bluff with a hand that's too good. We don't want to bluff with a hand that's good, that's sacrificing too much. And these, the king 6 suiteds, the jack 9 suiteds, the king 10 offsuits, they're basically saying like, yeah, like I have a good hand, but if I 3-bet and get blown off this equity, I'm sacrificing too much. So I'm gonna stay a little more polarized, not super polar, because I'm still expecting to take a flop. That's the other side of it, is like you're taking a flop 30% of the time. This is the call versus 3-bet, right? So if they're going to take a flop 30% of the time, you still want a pretty good hand. You don't want total trash. You're not 3-betting the 9-3 offsuit, right? You're not 3-betting the very bottom of the range. You're expecting to take a flop, but you don't want to have to fold away good equity.
So then, yeah, I mean, that's something that always surprised me about, because like ace 7, you know, I would say I would want to 3-bet ace 8 suited, king 8 suited, or king 7 suited, king 6 suited, queen 8 suited more often than I would queen 4, queen 3, but they love to be aggressive with queen 4 and 4 bets and in 3 bets. So that makes sense what you're saying about that in-between range. So it kind of goes right outside of that, a little bit weaker, and then more top of range, a little bit stronger as well too. And that's sort of how they disguise and play unpredictable out of the big blind. And then like you said, so now when you're facing a 3-bet, you are also supposed to be 4-betting pretty aggressively with a lot of these mixes with your queen 4s, queen 3s, and like the jack 4s and jack 5s and like ace 8 offsuit, ace 7 offsuit, the block in the ace and stuff like that occasionally. So can you talk a little bit about why that 4-bet range works that way, and kind of just maybe talk about this calling range and why it kind of cuts off at the queen 5, jack 6, the ace 9 offsuit over there, and then, you know, sort of how you think about 4-betting and mixing, and maybe if there's some times that you might not 4-bet with those bottom of range kind of hands.
Yeah, totally. I think if you're coming from 6-max, or if you're coming from a game where you've studied a 4-bet range previously, the structure of this range should make sense. And what I mean by the structure is there's no like strange, there's very little strange in between hand strengths here that are 4-betting for like an unknown reason. What I'm seeing is clear value. So that's like, you know, the good pairs and the top suited broadways. This is just value. We're planning to get all in, right? We're 4-betting with our good hands and we're planning to get all in. And then there's bluffs, and the bluffs are all at the edge of the calling range. The bluffs are all hands that don't do that great calling. There's very small exceptions to this, right? Like king jack offsuit is bluffing a small frequency. Queen jack offsuit is bluffing a small frequency. But I think if you just visualize it in that way, like if you make sense of it in that way, it's going to be a more logical framework. And honestly, like everything beyond that level of detail is something I just push out of my head, and I'm like, it's not worth thinking about, because the computer knows things that we don't know, and it doesn't necessarily translate into language all that well. So there's just, you know, beyond that point, I try not to make sense of it. Mm-hmm. So as a starting point, I think it's just like recognizing that the 4-bet is the last non-all-in raise. At least, you know, these 4-bets here, these are the last non-all-in raises. So we're polar. We're taking bluffs from the bottom of our continuing range, and we're taking value that we plan to get all in with. Now, you know, why do we choose these particular hands? I mean, I think it's a pretty simple combination of blockers and playability. Like we want to block something that's going to continue, and we're still expecting to take a flop sometimes. We're going to get called 26% of the time. So we're going to take a flop sometimes. Having a Broadway, having a suited hand, these are good things when we have to take a flop. So, you know, backtracking a little bit, you asked about the calling range too. Just thinking about like the reason this range is so wide and why the bluffs come from such weak hands, generally speaking, is we just have enough equity to continue. I mean, it's probably surprising that, you know, 5-3 suited and queen 6 suited and whatever ace 9 offsuit can call such a large 3-bet, but we're just up against this range. I mean, it's as simple as that, right? I mean, this is what you're up against. You're not up against your 12% 3-bet from the small blind. You're not up against, you know, old man coffee live 3-betting you 4% of the time or whatever it is. Like this is what you're up against. So like 9-7 suited is a huge hand. Again, it's just the equity of these hands. You got to kind of do what you're going to do. And if you don't do it, and we could show this maybe a little bit, but like if you don't continue these hands, you're going to have some problems.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting about this, you know, with the Wizard AI is that you can essentially node lock and you can make people tighter, you can make them looser, you can see how the adjustments are going to be different. Maybe you're 3-betting more, maybe you're 3-betting less, maybe you're bluffing more, maybe you're betting less. So it kind of depends on how your opponent's playing against you or what their strategy is, which is what I really love about trying to figure out how to use the node locking and the custom node locking and the custom solutions, is to try to figure out how is this strategy different than a GTO strategy? And then also for my strategy, how can I build a different strategy that might not be what a standard GTO strategy is going to be? So that way, if someone's training against me, they won't even know what to do, because you can split your ranges up differently, and maybe you're 3-betting a lot more, maybe you're not 4-betting these hands, maybe you're 4-betting way more, maybe you're doing different things or using different sizes, and I guess that's another level of the game, but yeah, it gives me a lot to think about.
Yeah, so why don't I show a quick example of what I'm talking about, where I might expect a very typical opponent to 4-bet enough, honestly, or like, I don't know, what I'm used to seeing even out of newer players to heads up is not necessarily that they come out and they don't have much fight, that they don't have enough aggression in their game, but a lot of players just come out and they look at the Queen 7 suited and they're just like, oh, that's not, they just automatic pass. They're just not thinking of it as that strong of a hand. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to secure the 4-betting to be the same. So the 4-betting is going to stay the way that it normally looks, but then there's going to be some individual combos that I think are just kind of likely to fold. Let's take out, 4-3 suited, 5-3 suited, maybe 10-7 and 9-6. I don't even want to mess with the 4-betting really. So it's a little bit strange for me to jump in here, but I don't think it's going to take much for us to see what I'm talking about. So I'll just take out like the 10-9 off and maybe I'll take out the Jack-10 off. I know that was like a sliver of 4-betting, but I don't think that should make a huge impact on the final result. So lock everything. Just made a little, pretty minuscule change to what they're doing against a 3-bet. And we'll see what's going to happen one step prior, what's going to happen to the big blind strategy. So immediately a shift towards more 3-betting, right? Not a huge, massive shift, but we're up to 24% from 22%. So I took away like 2 suited hands or something that are supposed to continue, and we're 3-betting significantly more. If we took this to an extreme situation, and this is how I think it's kind of important to like test all the different levels. It's important not to like, jump to just the really obvious. I think it should be obvious to everyone if I just like smash through everything, right? Yes, they're so tight. Oh, they're such a nit. Like if we smash through everything and we make them super tight, well, I mean, it's worth looking at. Yes, you're going to play exceptionally aggressive in the big blind. There's nothing else. There's no other players. There's no other variables. If your opponent folds way too much to 3-bet, you should 3-bet a lot. And not only 3-bet a lot, but 3-bet mostly bluffs, right? Reasonable medium strength hands are no longer 3-betting.
Interesting.
Now what's funny about this, and I've kind of yeah, I can see what's happening here. What's funny about this is that the AI it tries to find a way out. So actually it's even working around, and this is like a good lesson for any of you who are new to node locking. But like the AI is trying to work around the leak that I just built for it. I just told it to make all these huge mistakes, right? And it's like, no, I know what to do. I'm going to start opening hands that I didn't used to open, so that I can avoid the mistake that you just told me to make to be such a large mistake, right? So this is a good trick to be aware of. Like the AI will try to fix its mistakes, but your human opponents are not going to do this, right? So go back, node lock the original. What do we have? 81% opening frequency. Node lock that original. Oh, what is going on here? Let's do it combo by combo. So if
I've noticed this node lock, it takes takes a lot of practice, but once you learn how to do all this, you kind of can just run through it pretty quick and yeah.
So either way, like the original range, we're gonna lock all of that. The original range trying to change itself. If we force it to open the range that we know they're gonna open, and so if we node lock every hand that we know that we're supposed to open, and we keep that same bad response to the 3-bet, which we can see it's trying to cheat its way out of even more, but we've already seen the result. The strategy now is just to 3-bet this guy. If we know, like to actually just do it with everything. There's an 87% 3-bet. You can even see, if you click on compare nodes here, the difference in the previous strategy and the current strategy, and you can see how much it's worth. Like you can look at how much more you're winning now from the big blind. your EV in the big blind just went from 0.67 to 0.88. It's a massive, massive increase. I don't even think this looks, I mean, what do you think? Like coming from 6-max, do you think someone might actually, not the 4-3 off part, but someone might actually make a mistake like this for some amount of time?
Maybe if they're not a heads up player, I mean, ace-3, most people, I think they think you got to fold these hands at 3-bets. And when I first was thinking about it, it kind of would come to my mind, okay, I gotta play tighter here. I can't call these hands. Like, it's just really unusual to be able to call queen 8 suited, all the kings, all the aces, most of the queens, even a lot of these suited jacks, if you're used to studying. But I think if you're not necessarily studied, then everyone's going to kind of approach these differently. Some people might just call everything, and other people might kind of play this tighter range too. I don't think it's that out of line to say that somebody would be playing a lot tighter to 3-bets than you would be. Now, if you 3-bet them every time, eventually they're going to adjust, or they might start limping, or they might start folding more. So, how long they would stick with this is questionable, but I definitely think that for some people who don't realize how wide you can play, that this might be how they respond.
Yeah. And obviously I don't need to show every example, but like, even if there's somewhere in the middle, even if there's some strategy in the middle where they're playing a little bit too tight, it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning when you asked me about the opening range. Like, I always think there's an opportunity to improve on this. I always think there's some opportunity to do a little bit better than what the preflop charts are suggesting. So you want to study these, you want to study the preflop solution, but you also want to have a good sense for, okay, if there was a little bit of opportunity where they raise too much, fold too much, call too much, whatever it is, like, how would I jump on that, right? What's my quick strategy adjustment to jump on that thing? If they play too passively, if they play too tight, if they play too loose. And just a few node locks with this program, it might take you a few hours to come up with a plan for all those different player types. And now you've got big opportunity in your preflop strategy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's my biggest takeaway here, is just to play around with different strategies. This is what I do all the time with the node locking, just to see how do different boards react, how does our range react, what do we start bluffing with here, what spots can we just over bluff against somebody who's overfolding, what spots can we add on a lot more aggression, what spots do we need to play a lot tighter on later streets as well too. So those are all kind of things I think about. And so here, I guess you want to talk about 4-betting a little bit as well too, and just calling 4-bet ranges, which I think is going to be, like you said, it's going to be, if you kind of just reset the ranges and you look at a normal 4-bet calling range, it's going to be pretty wide, and then you're going to be out of position playing 4-bet pots. And, a lot of people are going to be in an uncomfortable situation when it comes to that. I know sometimes I get in a comfortable situation because a lot of times you're facing a 20% flop bet out of position, and you're supposed to start mixing with some back doors. You got to call with some low pairs on some boards, and to hit MDF, you got to be defending the flop small bet pretty wide. So that definitely can put a lot of people in some tricky spots, myself included.
Yeah, for sure. So now that I've removed the node locks, like we can see just the optimal response to 4-bet. And I think, so first of all, there's this extra raise option in here, which I think is just, it's a feature of having a raise size offered that doesn't necessarily need to be offered. If I was building this strategy myself, I would clean this up by editing, removing that size, and just having only the all-in, because I think there's no functional advantage to have that size. It's just in there for the sake of adding the strategic option it's supposed to add. So now we've got like a slightly cleaner picture of what we're doing here. And I think, again, like, what's important to recognize is which hands are just good enough. Like, which hands are just good enough to call because they're up against a pretty reasonably wide range. And those hands that are just good enough are like suited broadways, suited aces in particular. Everything else, like, not making that much money, right? Like, yes, we're seeing king queen offsuit continue in some fashion, ace jack offsuit continue in some fashion, 6-5 suited continue in some fashion, but these hands are like all very low EV hands. I do think this part of the pre-flop game oftentimes gets like I don't want to say overplayed, but people just they think they need to do more than they need to do. I don't think you need to do that much to play well against a 4-bet. Maybe this is just my perspective, but like taking, the suited broadways and the suited aces and doing something with them, and then doing something with pairs, like that's kind of the standard. And everything else is like a reaction to your opponent. So again, if they're a little bit out of line, if their sizing is a little bit too small, then yes, the suited connectors, the offsuit broadways, these hands are going to start making you real money. But if they're in line or even slightly tight, all you have to do is play your suited broadways, your suited aces and pairs. And then like, you know, looking at all the mixing it's a great intro to how I view just heads up in general. Like, yeah, there's a lot of spots with a lot of mixing, but I don't think people should be intimidated about that mixing as if it's like something they need to replicate. You come to heads up, in my mind, to make the best play against somebody, right? To know your options, to know your strategic options, but at the end of the day, to just decide like, this is the best play in this moment. So I would play a ton of spots where, you know, I have pocket nines and I'm facing a 4-bet and I know it could call and I know it could go all in. And I know in theory, it doesn't matter really, right? So like when I'm playing that player, what I'm really thinking about is what's the recent game flow? How likely are they to be bluffing in this moment right now, based on what I know? How likely are they to have value in this moment right now, based on what I know? And if they have value, you know, what are the benefits of me calling and trying to get away later? Like, does that even play out in my favor? All these kind of variables to lead me to a decision around whether call or all in makes sense. This is where I think pre-flop just gets, it's a little more creative in my mind, like how you apply the mix, because it's not so important at this stage of the hand. Like this is basically the final decision point. So I treat it kind of like the river, like it's the final decision point. Do you really need to play super balanced, the full mix? I mean, there are some situations where the answer is yes, but they're pretty rare. So I would treat all those as just an opportunity to make a good poker play.
Right. So going to be a lot of other situations. There are a lot of other, I guess, data points that are going to matter to you versus just trying to execute on a mixed strategy that you planned or you trained for. You're going to think about a few other data points as well, and then make your decision in the moment, which does make sense. And then, so you kind of use the mixing as a guide to know you can do either option, and it's just going to depend on what else is going on. Which does make a lot. I think I used to get a little bit overwhelmed by, okay, how often do I do this? How often do I do that? And you know, I kind of got away from that in a lot of different spots where I just know I can sometimes call, I can sometimes 3-bet. And I guess the trick is to figure out when are the right moments to call, when are the right moments to 3-bet, who are the right people to call verse, who are the right people to raise verse. And I think that's where the expertise comes in. A poker is to identify those situations and those players and those moments, like you were saying.
Yeah, 100%.
You want to show the trainer as well too? Maybe you can show the drills. This is how I personally got really good at heads up, is just by using the Wizard trainer. And I just did thousands of hands out of position, in position, 3-bets, to raise pots. So I just practiced my ass off for this.
Yeah. So for pre-flop, I mean, great thing is like once this solution is built, we've already got the pre-flop solution that we want to train. You can just click this guy right here, practice this spot, and that's going to open up a new window for us where it's going to pull over all that information from the pre-flop solution. So here it's got us navigated to that facing 4-bet situation because that's the last thing that we were studying, but you could certainly just go back to the start of the hand. But either way, I would say, you know, there's two ways to train pre-flop. The first way is just to fire it up. Like you've got, you know, if you have 15 minutes and you don't play that much heads up and you just really don't know what you're doing with these pre-flop ranges, go ahead and just start from the beginning. Looks like my settings have it to play 2 tables by default, but just play pre-flop, right? Just get used to, okay, I found, you know, a fringe hand here. I made a slight mistake, and just fire through volume. Right now, it looks like it's playing through the whole hand, which my preference would actually be, I'm going to stop it and show you. My preference would actually be, if you're just learning pre-flop, go into the settings, change the game mode here from full hand to street. And if it's street, it's just going to play, you know, if you're starting from pre-flop, it's just going to play pre-flop. If you're starting from the flop, it's just going to play the flop. So I think that, you know, firing through a lot of volume on pre-flop is how you're going to get better at pre-flop. And you can really just play around with, you know, if you aren't sure that a hand is a 3-bet or a flat, well, just 3-bet and find out, right? Like push your comfort zone a little bit, right? This is what I like to encourage people to do. People tend to know like what they're not great at. They might know, oh, I play a little bit too aggressively. Okay, we'll just start making some folds and see what the trainer tells you, right? Maybe you would, oh, I'm worried I'm playing too aggressively. You fold 10-6. No, blunder, right? Oh, I'm worried that I'm 3-betting too much. And then you flat ace-5 suited. And it's like, oh, okay, I was actually allowed to call that one. So taking in that quick feedback and just getting a lot of volume in, I think is the best way to improve broadly at preflop. And then, when you're done with your session, you stop, you show the history, you review your mistakes, right? Fairly basic application, I think, of the trainer format. Only other thing that I would suggest is like for someone who's a little bit more advanced, but still feels like they need that tune-up, they still need to, oh, I'm not sure that I'm playing well against 3-bets, or I'm not sure that I'm playing well against 4-bets. Just jump straight to that part of the hand, right? That's how they had it before. You go to the custom starting spot. You say that, okay, I'm facing, you could even change the size. Oh, I'm facing, someone's been using a small 3-bet against me lately. That's been weird. I don't really know what to do about that. So you just go straight to the fact that you're facing a small 3-bet, start training. And immediately you're only in that spot. You're just getting dealt hands where you're facing small 3-bet and you're getting feedback on that decision. I think it's a super good way to learn, and like, oh, I would have missed a 4-bet here because maybe I wouldn't have 4-bet that hand against a different size. Maybe I could 4-bet this one. Oh, I could. So this is probably my personal favorite way to use the trainer, just because I'm, let's call it a more advanced use case. So I have more particular problems I'm coming to the trainer with. I'm saying, oh, I really need to work on, this Doug guy, he's always using small 3-bets. I really need to prepare how to face small 3-bets. And maybe I want to do the opposite. Maybe I want to train my 3-betting range with the small size as well. And all that can be set up here.
Yeah, this is the most powerful thing to me with the Wizard is just using this trainer. I didn't know how to play heads up for 6-max or heads up, and I just use this constantly, and it really does help. So like you said, it gives you that immediate feedback. It sees where you're making your mixing mistakes at. It see if you're making blunders, you see right away. And you can even, sometimes I just put it at stop at a mistake, and if I make a mistake, I'll see the hand again, and I won't make that same mistake again because I already remember that that's what I'm supposed to do in that spot. So, and with heads up, there's, it's a lot easier in 6-max because 6-max, you got all these different spots. You're in position, you're out of position. There's sometimes 3 or 4 people in a hand. Whereas here, it's just 2 people, and the hands are all kind of the same. The 4-bet bluffs are the same. The king-jack offsuits, the ace-10 offsuits, the queen-4 suiteds, the king-4 suiteds. It's kind of all the same sort of ranges in terms of how you continue and what you do. But yeah, getting into the details of the sizes is something that I like to think about a lot too.
Okay, so we're going to start by looking at a single raised pot to kick off a little bit of post-flop material. All I did was I started with the same pre-flop solution that we built previously, filled in the pre-flop action, raise, call, and then chose ace-jack-7 in this case. Within this solution, what I've got set up is dynamic bet sizing on every street. My preference for these is to use dynamic bet sizing and just use 1 bet size on every street. There's a lot of great things that you can do in here if you have different use cases for your bet sizing setup. But for me, I just want like a simple strategy that's easy to keep track of, that's easy to understand. And normally what that means is just having the 1 best bet size in all the different situations and all the different nodes. So that's what these settings here allow for. And then I also just add all in as an option. So if all in is like, is not the chosen dynamic size, it's also going to give me the option to just go all in.
The dynamics, so basically, the different boards, it'll give you a different size. So ace-jack-7, it'll recommend 2, and then some other boards it might recommend pot, and some other boards it might recommend 25%. So you feel like that's a good way to train, is just to let the AI pick the size for you.
Yeah, I think there's like, sometimes what I'll suggest to players who are more sure of their strategy, like players who aren't really at the exploration phase and they're more at the training and reinforcing phase. Maybe they've decided what size they like to use. Maybe they know that they like to bet 33% pot on all ace high boards. That's just like what they've decided. They could absolutely just go in here, edit this to 33%, and use this as their default size for their training. And I would even recommend that because, like, why would you study different than you would play, right? Why would you study a strategy that you're not planning to play? you could do that. You could make that change. You could still practice this spot like we showed before.
Well, to practice this spot, you have to go back to the initial settings, and then you need to put in the fixed bet size as 33%, because if you put in dynamic, right now the trainer will only train the dynamic answer. So if you want to put in the trainer a different size, you can't edit it right here. You have to edit it in the initial setup, and then you can use those sizes too.
That's a good point. Yeah. So within here, you can always go back.
This took me a while to figure out. By the way, I couldn't figure out why I did this. So this was something that I had to explore a little bit of my own.
Yeah, it's a good point. You want to make sure that like whatever solution that you built in here have all the settings that you want, or when you're going to set up your drill, you have your drill with all the settings that you want.
Yeah, so I would just normally go to fixed and then put in 33%, put in whatever size. If I want a different size, otherwise I'd be comfortable using the dynamic size too. I practice with both of them.
Yeah, it's a good point. We're going to look at just the basics of this c-betting strategy using the originally suggested size, the dynamic size here. So something we were talking about before, like the challenges that six max players and challenges that you, Joey, were having like coming into heads up is kind of like understanding all these non-aggressive strategies, all these mixed strategies that in situations where you might normally just assume like, oh, it came ace jack 7, I just bet like a third pot with everything, right? Or oh, it's a high card board, I just bet and they fold, right? But what actually happens in a lot of these situations is you have, still an aggressive strategy, still a more betting than not strategy, but there's plenty of checking, figuring out which hands to check, and then there's also the expectation that once you bet, you're going to get called or raised the majority of the time. You're actually going to see the big blind putting up a fight. I mean, can you think of like within this strategy, just looking at it right now, like what parts of this are the biggest challenges for you?
Usually the biggest challenge is just identifying how often I want to bet with all these different hands. So, it's mixing jacks, it's kind of mixing even the sevens, it's mixing the bottom of range, it's checking 7 deuce, it's betting 8 deuce. So I think for me, it's just identifying, because like you said, right, a big mistake you can just make is just over betting here, over c-betting here, because you have, in my mind, you have range advantage, you have more ace jacks, you have aces, jacks, sevens, they're going to be 3-betting all those hands, you have a lot of 2 pairs. So for me, you have a lot of straight draws, you got a lot of implied odds for a lot of those straights to potentially make some big hands if they have a potential ace themselves too. So in my mind, I just want to bet a lot. So it's kind of identifying, okay, how often should I be checking with my check range? And then even king 8, right? A king high would be a natural hand. I would just check back here. I have king high, but it even wants you to bet some of those. And normally it wants you to bet hands I've noticed that have a backdoor flush draw or that have a blocker to a backdoor nut flush draw, because that's going to take away some of the combos of flush draws that they're going to be continuing with on the backdoor. So just identifying, okay, what are the moments? And usually that's what I've been learning lately, is that for the offsuit hands, it really does matter if you have a backdoor blocker to one of the nut flushes. So that I guess I maybe answer my question is that, what are the indicators I look for to know check versus bet versus.
Yeah, I think something like a skill that I didn't realize I had from heads up until I had to apply it to tournament format or some other game was identifying where the folding range was in my opponent's strategy, right? So what I think what you're talking about, like the need to pay attention to whether your king 8 offsuit has a heart and a club or a heart and a spade, is the difference between recognizing that like it matters when your opponent faces a bet if they have the king of hearts or if they have the king of clubs, right? Because when we bet 40% pot, it's going to make a difference to their continuing strategy. Let's say with, it's going to be the suited hands. So let's say with king 5 suited or king 4 suited or king 3 suited or whatever, it's going to make a difference with some of their king high hands, whether they have a club or a different suit, right? Because they can't just call every king high. They call most king highs, but they don't call the king highs with an undercard to the 7, and they don't call the king highs with an undercard that lack the backdoor flush draw. So it makes a notable difference. Maybe not, it doesn't seem notable because the ranges are so wide, but like when your opponent's only folding 33% of the time, you really can zoom in on like, okay, well, what makes up that 33%? Like what are the bad cards on this board? What does my opponent not want to have? He doesn't want to have, the queen of clubs. He doesn't want to have the king of clubs. Doesn't want to have two cards where one is between the jack and the 7 and the other is below the 7. Like he doesn't want to have 9-6, right? And like thinking about hand classes in that way is not, I think, very intuitive for people who are used to more condensed ranges. But this just kind of makes sense to me, is like you just scan the board for like, where are the bad cards? Like, what are the bad cards to have on this board? The bad cards block the trash. So that's going to be a lot of the checks for the small blind. A lot of the checks from the small blind are just going to come from like the bad cards on the board. Now, it's a 2-player game. There's some counter exploitation that can happen. You can't go all in on this idea, but you definitely see that in the patterns. So if you are noticing, that, like you said, that the king 8 with the king of clubs is doing less betting, there's a reason for that. In general, these cards are seeing less aggression, and there are actually ways in here that you can go through and you can filter, and you can look only at offsuit hands that include a club, and you can see the betting frequency come down. And you could look at, only offsuit hands that include the other cards, and you could see the betting frequency either like stay roughly the same. Yeah, it looks like it's staying roughly the same if you isolate one of those cards, but the club betting frequency comes down. So thinking,
and some spots I just started understanding how to use these filters and exclude, and you'll notice some spots where, especially on like 3 flush boards or even like a flush draw board, the main characteristic is you have to have a backdoor flush draw, and you want to block the flush draw, which is going to be one of their calling hands. So I like the way you put it, which is that you want to look at what cards that they're going to fold, and if you have those cards, then theoretically that means you should bet a little bit less. That's how I would interpret it. I sort of think about it as blockers and reverse blockers, which is a PLO concept that I used all the time, and I found that my initial thought on these boards are, what do I have backdoor draws? What are my blockers? What am I blocking that they're going to have? And that's sort of how I start to think about the hand. Not to say that that's the end all be all, like you just said, but it is a data point that I'm always using lately. And I found it heads up, it really, really applies for continuing on later streets.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, the other thing to talk about, I guess, is like the good hands that check. Like, obviously we don't just check with bad hands. We also check with some good hands. And I know that like very commonly talked about is the concept of protection, or like the need to get protection for your hand, right? So I think that, a lot of people would say, if I'm choosing hands to check, like I would check my bad aces, like these ace X offsuits over here, which is correct. Maybe my high high under pairs, because they don't need much protection. They're kind of showdownable hands, right? And then, maybe you could use the same logic with some of the jacks or some of the 7s, but you would also kind of expect, by using that logic of protection, you would expect maybe more betting from like the lowest pocket pairs, or you would expect maybe more betting from, I don't know, like a bad 7X hand or something. So I do think sometimes that concept gets taken too far. And I guess I just want to reinforce the idea that like, if you just look at the equity of your hand, or maybe look at strategy plus equity as a way to visualize it a little bit better. Like, there's just certain hands that are not that great, and they just kind of don't want to put that much money in the pot. And that hand tends to have, about, let's say, what a king 9, king 8, and pocket 5s, pocket 3s, pocket 2s have in common, right? Like, they look like different hands, but they kind of just are the same. They kind of just have the same rough amount of equity, right? Like, sometimes we do overcomplicate these things. So I do want to just point out that sometimes finding what hands want to check is as simple as like, well, I just had a medium amount of equity on that board, so I wanted to check.
One thing I've been doing lately is I use the summary tab here, and then I basically will look at what part of the range wants to check, or sorry, the filters one.
Yeah.
And then basically when you go down, it says your hands, so it has your equity. And I notice, okay, no main hands likes to bet more. The king highs, the low pairs are typically, this is like the same makeup on most boards, is that the bottom of range is doing more betting, the middle range is doing more checking, and top of range is doing more betting.
Yeah.
And that's kind of been an indicator I would look for. That's why a lot of times king highs here typically tend to be the checks, because that's what I've noticed in a lot of formations, second pairs and top pair. If I want to use an overbet strategy here, for example, this is going to change completely because it's going to have less of these mergy hands, and it's going to just going to be more clear where you're betting your kind of backdoor flush draws and your double backdoor hands, cards that are kind of around the 7 or in between the 7 and jack, or that have the strong ace, and then you check back your weak aces, and you'll kind of check back your king highs and check back the jacks and check back the queen highs as well too sometimes, unless they have a straight draw to go with it. So I'm kind of the 40%, the strategy is a lot different. Whereas if we change this to an overbet strategy, it's going to be, these are the parts I've been really experimenting with lately on single race pots to see how different it is and to build some different strats.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually, I think it's a good opportunity to show quickly what you're talking about, because I've definitely been through, I've worked with players and I've built strategies before where this was the type of board where the sizing that we would use is an overbet. And, something again in heads up that I think gets in no limit in general, but like in heads up, it's easier to manipulate this. But I think in no limit in general, people get a little bit too caught up in like using the best bet size and only the best bet size. And they have to use the best bet size. And I'm a big proponent of the fact that like there's probably infinite different strategies that you could use that all have the same EV and or a negligible difference in EV between them. And if you're using the strategy that just like suits you better or matches up better against your opponent, then you're gaining an edge. So like this strategy that I just, generated here by replacing the bet size with an overbet, is a totally valid, totally reasonable strategy. But now you have a way different thing to learn. I mean, like you said, now we've got this extremely polarized view, and what you just showed, I think actually we could even see it here, maybe a bit bigger. Yeah. So even like here, you can see there's almost no betting happening from everything between under pair through king high, because I mean, you just forced it to bet huge. So now we're playing a polarized strategy. But you can build a really good strategy this way. There's absolutely nothing wrong with using this strategy, in my opinion. And I think that like I would even encourage players who have a little bit of comfort in the game to just say, oh yeah, like I feel really confident in my polarized game. So on any board that is, let's call it static, like on any board that's static, doesn't matter what the cards are, we're just going to use an overbet strategy. And you could use this tool to learn how to do it.
Mm-hmm. So when you're in this data point right here and you're at this screen, are there any other custom filters that you prefer to go to right now? Or like, what are you looking for if you're here? You mentioned strategy plus equity. Is there EQR, or do you like to go to ranges and see where they fall, or what would you recommend that I want to look out for to kind of give me some information here that's going to be, because there's so much information to technically take in.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, personally, I spend a lot of time in the strategy plus EV tab. I find that if I'm trying to, let's say, like tweak things about the strategy, let's say I'm trying to, figure out if I can over bluff or under bluff, and I want to know what hands to use, I might use compare EV. I do like compare EV because what it does is, we can compare, let's say, betting versus checking. There's only two real options in this case, so it's a little simpler. But I can compare betting versus checking, and I can see lit up in really bright colors, like do not bet these hands, do not check these hands, right? This I think is like a nice, easy way to get to the point where I can test, okay, how acceptable is it to like change what I'm doing with queen 6? Well, it's in white, so it's very reasonable to change what I'm doing with queen 6, to change what I'm doing with 8-6 suited, right? But don't change what you're doing with jack 6. Like, do not change what you're doing with jack 6. So I find this to be a nice like primer for exploitative ideas. But otherwise, I spend most of my time here because I think this is most of the info I want. I want like the shape of the range, and then I want to know the number. I want to know like how much is it worth. I mean, when you say shape of range, what do you mean by that? Because I've heard that range morphology. I've heard that a lot lately. So what do you mean by that? The shape. So what's the shape of the range here? Yeah, I mean, what's funny is I think I've spent so much time on solvers in the past that like when I look at this, I'm kind of seeing what you see when we look at this. Like when you see like the good hands are betting more, the medium strength hands are checking more, the bad hands are betting more. This is kind of like such a new view to me or like the equity thing here. This is great to me for like teaching content, but when I'm actually studying, this just like, it's just how my brain's wired, you know, like this shape, like the shapes that are occurring here on this grid make sense to me the same way that this information here is like meant to get the information across. This is a much better way probably for someone who hasn't stared at grids for 10 years. So that's really all I meant by the shape, is just like where it's lit up. You know, like there's just like the parts of the grid that are lit up. They just make sense to me. Like, oh yeah, I know those are the mid equity hands. Those are the trash hands. Those are the stuff that interact well with the board.
And then what do you think? So for people tending to get wrong on the flop as the aggressor in a single raise pot, you think it's just betting too much, or maybe not betting enough, or not splitting enough, or what have you noticed, I guess, in your encounters with working with everybody and playing people?
Yeah, I definitely think, I mean, the number one thing that I'm encouraging people to do, and I'm going to go back to the original strategy here, is I'm always encouraging people to check more and just like feel comfortable with what happens after they check. And I think that until you go down that line and you start practicing how to play, you know, against whatever, the turn probe on the 3 to a straight card, I think there's a lot of like fear and discomfort associated with taking those passive actions. And people think like, oh, I'm going to get exploited, or it looks weak, or I turn my hand face up. And I'm like, I don't know, man, the solver does it. So like, I'm pretty sure it's still a valid play, right? We just need to get comfortable with it. So I'm always encouraging people to just try out way more checking back. And start getting better than your opponents at what comes next. Get better than them at delay c-betting, right? Like they check to you twice, get better than them. You know, how many of us knew that queen 4 off was going to be a pure pot bet after we got checked to twice? Like I could have guessed that this was fine, but I wouldn't have even known this off the top of my head. And the typical player who never checks this board has never looked at this grid. So I think there's all this opportunity in the checkbacks. So I wouldn't necessarily say, like, the reality is it's hard to make a big mistake when you're c-betting. Like it really is hard to make a big mistake. If we're just talking about raw EV, like look at the grid, everything's mixed, right? So it's hard to like punt it. And I think, you know, people who maybe use the program and play the trainer and they get a good score, they're like, great, I've got c-betting nailed, but their frequency is like 90% c-bet instead of 70%. And it's like, well, you're doing fine. Like there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's not a problem. But I think if they want to move a little bit further, that's where the opportunity is like do the thing that other people aren't doing.
Okay, so here we face the bet. And so now let's talk a little bit about single raise pot, out of position, defending, and then that'll give us an idea of what we can expect as the aggressor, because we can identify if this person isn't check raising, they're not going to be including these hands. If they are check raising for bluffs, what kind of bluffs are they going to be using? And then this gives you a nice way of breaking that down and kind of giving you an understanding of how to react to the strategy. And then that's going to help our small blind approach on later streets a lot.
Yeah. So like this check raise, you know, I want to address first because it's complicated, and it's also like a very non-standard, I think, human strategy to check raise to such a large size. I think that this is a great strategy, and I think that like really, really big check raises, this was actually like using this engine was how I prepared to play against Doug at the Lodge. And when you're playing really deep, the check raise frequency in spots like, you know, let's call this a static board because I already referred to it as that. Like check raising on static boards oftentimes looks like this, where you just go extremely polar and you just go for all of it. It's a really good strategy, I think, because it's so hard to be disciplined and fold the right amount to these really, really, really big bets. And you don't get that many chances to use bets that are this big. So I think this is a sweet strategy. We can get more into it later, but like a lot of players are not going to show you this. A lot of players are going to show you like a 3x or a 4x check raise. They're going to go way thinner for value. They're going to use, you know, some top pairs, some semi bluffs, what have you. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're playing weak or soft. So you still need to respect that check raise strategy. But I think it's, you know, it's a good reminder that anytime we get into these solutions and it's like, oh, I wanted to know what to do against, you know, a player who just always check raises, they use like the 75% button on their slider or whatever, right? Or they always go 3.5x because you're playing live. Just edit it, right? Just edit it, put that in. That's a much more realistic response, and we're kind of interested in what the strategy is against that response, and we're interested in how to adjust accordingly. So
it's going to give us a more polar versus a linear strategy. So we kind of did see this with our small bet strategy, where if we use that hypergeometric size, then it goes very polar, where top of range, bottom of range. Whereas you go smaller, it'll go this more kind of, mixed range, some top pairs, some jacks, some, I guess not really meaning jacks at 2 pairs, but, I feel the backdoor straight draws, backdoor flush draw combinations that you're going to have as well, too. I guess this one goes a little bit less with the 6-5 suited, and which are kind of my natural hands I'm going to look for. I'm going to look for 6-5 suited, 8-5 suited, 8-9 suited, kind of hands that have that gut shot or have a backdoor straight draw with a backdoor flush draw. So with this, it looks like it maybe calls those hands a little bit less with this size, and it uses more of top pairs versus before where it was using even weaker hands. Here it seems like the hands are a little bit stronger, and those weaker hands, they're just going to call with those weaker hands.
Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes counterintuitive, but like the bigger you bet, the more you get to bluff, right? So when we're using that humongous raise size, by proportion, you're going to see way more bluffs. Not literally, way more like, well, it's the flop actually. So yeah, you will see like literally more bluffs than value. You've still got equity. So, but now that we've reduced it, now that we've made the size more reasonable, like the ratio is a little bit more intact. We could see, exactly what we're dealing with. You could even just hover here. I forgot about this feature, which is great. Could just hover here and see that it's, 51% no-made hand, which is still more bluffs than value, but a lot of those have some kind of draw. But way more top pair. That's like visually obvious to me. Way more top pair now. And again, funny like suit relevance that you might be interested in, right? Always using clubs with your thin check raise. Another interesting dynamic where now you're thinking it's literally the opposite of what I talked about last time, right? We're value raising. We want them to have their calls. We want them to have the backdoor flush draw, right? We have a value raise, but it's a thin value raise. So we need them to continue something unpaired, or we're interested in them continuing something unpaired when we have top pair. So we raise our clubs. We hope that they have diamonds, hearts, or spades, and they continue in some way.
Wow. That's really, I never thought about that before, actually. That makes a lot of sense.
So
this is really, that whole, I got to really think about that more. Is there a name for what you just described, which is like is there a name? Is this called like an idea? Having the club here. Look at that. Having clubs is so important here for your check raise values.
It's a great question. There should be a name for it. I don't know if there's, it's just unblocking, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I guess reverse player. Yeah, it's pretty wild to see. I would think here that I would want to check raise hands that I do have a backdoor flush draw potentially with sometimes, because that way I do have a lot of nut equity potentially where I can make a big hand and I could potentially win a big pot. So I might think that would be the hand I want to do it with. I might choose ace-5 with a backdoor flush draw here before I would choose ace-5 with clubs. But you're basically saying you want to reverse block the pair. You want to reverse block the pair, and you want them to continue. And does it have something to do with just being able to get them off on later street, or is it what's the reason why we want them to continue? I guess with the these backdoor draws and stuff like that.
I do want to be careful like how I talk about it, because blocker effects are pretty complicated. Like I'm saying it as if there's only one reason, and there's definitely more than one reason. Even as you were talking, I could think of more reasons why clubs would be beneficial. Like if we go back one step and we assume that most of the clubs that small blind could have chose not to bluff because, like we said, they block the trash, so they don't want to bluff, right? So if a club on average is held by a value hand, when you're the small blind, because you're not bluffing so much with clubs, on average it's held by a value hand. So now it changes our incentives for how to raise when we know that clubs usually mean you have value. So if I have a club, that means you are a little more likely to not have value. So these kind of dynamics also exist. I think this one's pretty tricky, but it makes sense to me that the range is still extremely wide. So now you're trying to encourage some part of the range that normally wouldn't continue to continue. If we were dealing, you could find a very similar value situation where you're up against a much tighter range, where now your interest is in having implied odds to draw out on them, right? So now you're thinking, oh, I have mid pair or bottom pair or even top pair, and I'm check raising, but I'm doing it with the backdoor flush draw because I need a backup plan, because I need that little boost of equity. So there's these like subtle differences that could come up. I don't want to make like a sweeping generalization about how the blockers work. But I think this is kind of unique to like a super wide range, super small pot kind of situation. I don't think you would see this that much in a lot of other spots.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. You got to be very careful to make those assumptions on every board, and it's going to be case by case basis.
For sure.
But it is definitely something I'm gonna think more about. That's for sure. So I never really considered that.
Cool. So let's talk about the calling range a little bit. Something that's interesting, and we touched on it briefly in heads up, is that there's not a significant range advantage in many spots for either player, right? I want to go back to what we call like the root node here, just the to see the equities. And you can see right here that getting to the flop, big blind, single raise pot, ace jack 7, if you had to guess before you saw this, like what the equity was of the in-position player, certainly we'd come up with a number higher than 51%, right?
Oh,
I mean, this looks like an amazing board for the small blind, and somehow we have the thinnest of thin edges on this board. So it starts to explain not only the more conservative betting strategy, but also the fact that there's not much folding happening. Like there's just a lot of hands that can continue here. And we were talking a little bit about minimum defense. Heads up, the way that I tend to teach minimum defense, and I have, some opinions on it, but heads up no limit from all the games that I've seen is like the only game where you get close to reaching minimum defense everywhere, like almost everywhere. And I think it's exactly for that reason. You don't necessarily like hit it on the head, the exact number every spot, obviously, because, poker's not a toy game. But it gets really close just because ranges are so close. Like there's always an opportunity to continue. And if you're not continuing enough, there's always a chance to bluff you more. And you just have a lot of equity with pretty much every part of your range. So I do think that this is, a good representation of the fact that even on a 2 Broadway board from out of position, we're still going to fight, and we're still going to fight close to the minimum defense frequency.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, so my natural inclination here, let's say I'm working on this spot and I'm playing against someone who I don't think is check raising me with 6-4, 5-3, 4-3, 8-5, 7 deuce, sort of that bottom of range, 10 deuce, queen deuce, the double backdoors, backdoor straight draw, backdoor flush draws, then I would alter this to say they're actually going to be calling with those more. And then typically what I find in my flop strat is I can just bet sometimes all the time. Like in this board, if they're not check raising enough, you can actually bet almost every time, is what I found in the past, which is kind of interesting because if I'm playing against you, I know Kevin Rabichow, this guy's coming after me, right? He's going to be having the 4-3. He's going to have the 7 deuce. So you're going to have maybe even more check raises here just to make my life miserable. Where versus another player, they're never check raising me. So it's like I think you really got to think about this a lot on every flop, because if the person isn't check raising these combos, then everything it could be different. Not to say you'd have to be different, but maybe you just go along with your normal strategy. They don't check raise you. You keep that in mind, and then you keep that in mind for later streets too. So I feel like there's a couple different ways to play around with that idea too.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I think you're going to be hitting me here with a 7, 18. I mean, I don't know. Like the better players, they're going to give you 4 sizes. Like, what are you going to do now, buddy? Like, oh, I don't.
I'm definitely going for now that I've seen the 18 big blind check raise. I mean, I think prime practiced Kevin would have found the gigantic check raise here. And I think this is, just because I want to show it, and because I think that it's a good strategy to learn. Like you can see how quickly this type of huge check raise gets dangerous. Because I zoom in right here, right? You've got a heads up game where you're facing 1 bet and 1 raise, and you're folding top pair.
Top pair, yeah.
It's hard for people to combat these kind of strategies. So once you know that they're valid, once you know that they're close, I say like get good at them quick and start putting them out there.
Yeah, I mean, this is dangerous when you're the caller, because if I call here with a 7, most 7s are going to have backdoor flush draws, I'm imagining. So you got to be disciplined with your top pairs, because I've noticed if you call with the threshold top pairs here, you got to fold those potentially on the turn if you do face more aggression as well too. So you have to be, even if you do call here and you're hitting the right node, you still have to be very disciplined on the turn. And then you get to the river. I mean, this is one of the most dangerous spots and I feel like you can really exploit, like hypothetically, let's say you only take this big size with your value hands and you necessarily aren't bluffing as much. Therefore, they should actually fold even more, but they're calling because they think that you are bluffing them a little bit more often than not. Then you basically can own them on the turn and river because you don't have many bluffs. And even if you do look here and you make it a tighter calling range a little bit by them and say, okay, they're not calling all these, 7s and stuff like that, then I found that the strategy as the check raiser is you are so value heavy on turn and river that, and most people aren't adjusting. This is like the whole, I was studying this the other day and my mind was kind of exploding looking at all the possibilities. So this is kind of fresh on when I was preparing through the drills.
Yeah. I was going to say, like, this is a great opportunity to use the trainer again. Not necessarily to practice like exactly against this huge size, because maybe you don't see this kind of play so often. But just putting yourself in the scenario where you're facing counter aggression and like practicing your defense. Because I think that those less traveled parts of the game tree, like, oh, I bet and I faced a raise, are open for these like pretty big gaps between the correct amount of defense and like what would be intuitive to you, even against the more normal sizes. I think there's just like some misjudgments that are quite easy to make. And the mistakes, I was saying the EV mistakes that you can make when c-betting are not large at all. But as soon as we're talking about facing check raise, you can make some big EV mistakes right away. And what you're talking about is how they compound street over street, right? So it gets really important to just put reps in those things.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I would just fold. If a guy check raised me really big, I'm probably not calling with all those ace offsuit cards. I'm probably not calling with all of the jacks. Like, I'm probably over folding versus big check raise here, which means that obviously you can just check raise me with more of the, I think it's the bluffs, right? You basically get to check raise me with more of the bluffs. The bluffs are probably going to come from the double backdoor range, or maybe, I guess you probably don't want to have, you really don't want to have 7s then, because you're going to, that's when, if they're folding 7s and they're folding jacks, then you maybe want to reverse block the 7 and jack, which could be a hand that they would fold, and they are going to be mixing that with that size in the flop too.
Yeah, I would actually. So this is a case where I would argue, and we're really getting into the nitty gritty of like where to do which blocker application. But here, this is a huge bet, and because it's a huge bet, the impact of you not having the top of your range is going to matter a lot more than the impact of you having the bottom of your range. Like, you're going to have a bad hand most of the time. Doesn't really matter what my 2 cards are. Like, you're usually just going to have a bad hand. And when I'm using a strategy that generates 70% folds in theory, I can kind of count on you having a bad hand, like almost no matter what my cards are. But what I'm really hoping is you don't have one of your best hands, right? So I really don't want you to have 2 pair. I really don't want you to have ace king. So I would think that if I know that you're just like playing, you're kind of nut pedaling, like waiting for the top of your range, I would take everything that blocks the top of your range and always raise. Like, everything that has a 7, always raise. Everything that has a king, always raise. Everything that has a jack, always raise. Right? And that way, I'm kind of like, I'm taking all the hands that are kind of a jack might be taking it too far. I don't know. How bad is a jack raising in theory? Yeah, we lose like half a big blind raising a jack in theory. Maybe that's too far. But I think the point is clear. Like, every time I have one of those premium blockers and a valid raising candidate, you use the premium blocker, because we're using such a large size. Now the premium blocker has more impact on the situation.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, we could talk about that. We are getting into the weeds here. Okay, so let's say hypothetically, let's say hypothetically big blind calls here, and then, which is kind of going to be, the most case scenario, and then we go to the turn, and maybe we can play a hand out in the single raise format, and then kind of just talk a little about turn and river too, because obviously those are pretty important parts of knowing when to continue and what combos and everything like that. And here it's just giving you that real polar, or I guess out of position. Yeah, even in position. Wow.
Still, yeah.
It's giving you a super polarized strategy on the turn, 200% pot with top of range and with a bunch of hands. I'm assuming that it's going to be all gut shots. It's going to be your flush draws. It's going to be any 8-9, 3-4, 4-6, 9-10. Those will probably be hands that have, what I've noticed, hands that have equity if they do potentially get called. And also there is some with that they might have like a future blocker. It's kind of weird. Maybe you can explain this concept, because I feel like the best barrel cards on the turn sometimes have the worst blockers to bluff with on the river. And other times, the best barrel cards on the turn end up having the best blockers to also bluff with on the river occasionally too. And being able to identify that is like the light bulb moment in knowing, okay, here's when to, because I didn't know anything. I was like bluffing all, like I'd overbet here, king, queen, diamonds, and I'd bluff the river. And it'd be like, no, don't do that. I'm like, why the hell would I not bluff king, queen? It doesn't make sense. I block ace, king, I block ace, queen. But then I started to realize how this worked a little bit deeper. And I was like, oh, actually that's, those are the hands you want your opponent to have. You want him to have queen 10. You want him to have king 10. You want him to have a 10. A 10 specifically, you do not want to have a 10 here if you're going to bluff the river. But a 10 on the turn is actually a good card, because then it's going to take away some of their continuing hands as well. And it also blocks some of their strong pairs, the second pairs too. So is there a name for that? Or is that just, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, you're getting into some good stuff. I think what's important to, this is going to be another situation, I guess, where I say that we want to like track where the folds are coming from. But I think it's a good opportunity to connect it to the preflop range, actually. So like this point, so let's just set the stage a little bit. We're at the turn. We have a double barrel opportunity. And on these blank turns, a lot of times what we see is the geometric sizing that lets us get all in on the river. So same bet size on the turn, same bet size on the river. By the way, we're talking a lot of poker math, and we meant to suggest that for if anything that we're talking about, minimum defense, geometric sizing, if any of this feels too advanced, amazing video from Tombos on the GTO Wizard YouTube. I believe it was called Poker Math. Is that right?
Poker Math, everyone needs to know. The best video, like I said, the best video this actually made me want to work with GTO Wizard. When I watched that video, I was like, dude, I got to talk to this guy. He's the man. He was cooking in that video. So that video is pretty great. So
yeah. So just because I won't be able to do it justice the same way that he does, I'm not going to get into all the weeds, but the large bet size here, the extremely large bet size that we're seeing suggested for the turn, is a geometric 2-street size. Even though it's a big bet, and I was kind of just talking about how, when you use big bets, you want to have those premium blockers. You also do want to pay attention to what's folding. And a big part of the, let's call it the check call, check fold range on this board, is going to be the like missed straight draws. And not only the missed straight draws, but also like bottom pair and second pair, right? So I'm naming a lot of hands, but once we're betting this big, I mean, it may be just easier to show the response because this is where all of the impact is coming from. We're folding out 2/3 of the range. Bet is huge, so the folding percentage is huge. But every ace is going to continue. So a bunch of jacks are going to fold, a bunch of sevens are going to fold, a bunch of missed straight draws are going to fold. The only stuff that continues has diamonds or an ace and like a few random things in between. But what I always emphasize, if we're trying to track ranges and we're trying to pay attention to where the folds are coming from, I don't just mean like name individual hands. I mean, where's the volume of folds coming from, right? This area right here, this is so many combos. Like there's other folds on this board, obviously, but queen 6 suited, like this looks like it's important and it's not because it's 2 combos, right? So it doesn't really have the same sort of impact that, I mean, what is this? The king highs alone are like 40 combos. So there's an enormous weight on this part of the range over here. And we can pretty quickly see that this part of the range over here is like 2 cards from king through 8, basically. King through 7, I guess. We're not going to bluff with the 7. 7's a good hand. But 2 cards from king through 8, right? these are the cards we don't want when we're bluffing, basically.
Wow. So our indicators, okay, so let's take it back to small blind. So if I'm in the small blind, my indicator is I want to reverse block what they're going to be folding, I guess would be a way to say it. So in this situation, we can now look at our strategy, and we are not betting with a lot of kings. We're not betting with a lot of queens. We're actually not betting with the gut shot. So this is actually something I've been fucking up with then lately, is I would auto gut shot, bet a gut shot here, probably. Even if especially if I had one diamond. If I had one diamond, I would definitely bet king 10 of diamonds offsuit. I'm definitely betting that hand. 10 of diamonds, I'm over bluffing this turn. Definitely then, because I haven't really thought about that. That part is really interesting because...
And there's this particular board, like there's other gut shots, right? Like there's these down here as well. So on this particular board, like it's maybe hard. Even these hands here, like these are draws that are bluffing a ton. So this, I guess, is what I mean, where there's just so many hands and heads up to say like the gut shots. Like that's just too many hands to like make
true. Yeah, I'd say like it's a high
about that, right? Yeah, I think what you're probably getting wrong, and this is going to reflect what a lot of people are getting wrong coming from Six Max, is they're viewing categories like they're not used to having such a wide variety of gut shots or a wide variety of flush draws. So they're forgetting that high gut shots and middle gut shots and low gut shots all have kind of their distinct properties, right? They're distinct ways of interacting with this board. So I wouldn't view, king 10, queen 10, 10, 9 the same way that I would view 6, 3, 9, 6, 8, 4, right? Like the low gut shots are really premium bluffing candidates. The high gut shots, not so much.
Yeah, I see. That makes a lot of sense. I see what you're saying. I like what you said about reverse blocking the hands that we most want them to fold. So when I'm looking to say, okay, what are they going to fold? What do they have the most combos of folding? And then looking at my hand and saying, okay, well, what properties does my hand have compared to that range? And then using that, especially in these polarized sizes. I mean, that's so helpful right there. Yeah. That's crazy. Okay. That's interesting to think about. So here we're basically just splitting it up with our draws and top of range. Hands that can improve, hands that can bluff the river, and then yeah, I mean that makes sense to me.
Yeah, you talked a little about like having a future blocker, and there's some examples of that. Like you can see a hand like Queen of Diamonds 4, Queen of Diamonds 3, right? You've got that like single high card, single low card, a little bit of interaction going on. So yeah, you have kind of both good things happening here, like not so much interaction with the folds, but also the chance to have a really good blocker on the river. So maybe Queen of Diamonds 4, we can, this kind of teases our way to the river, but like maybe Queen of Diamonds 4 is going to bluff always on the turn because it has really good turn interaction. But on the river, it's going to depend what comes. Like if we get, I would expect, and we'll see if I'm right, I'd expect when we get the low card that misses the diamonds, we shut it down, right? We're not so excited about these blockers anymore. We've got the other stuff. We've got the total brick hands, but we get something that connects with the board, something like the 8 of diamonds. Looks like we can't have bluffs anymore. And now we have the single Queen of diamonds to run the bluff.
Wow.
So there's a little bit of that variety in the bluffing range like you were getting at. And now we don't have to take a hand. So many people feel obligated. They'll river the 8, right? And maybe sometimes this does bet, but like they'll river the 8 and they'll feel this obligation like, oh, how can I ever have a bluff here? Like all I ever do is bluff gut shots and straight draws and flush draws and everything just completed. And well, therein lies the problem, I suppose. But if you have that good distribution to your range, you don't need to make that crazy bluff on the end. You've got combos that are prepared exactly for this.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. You got to be very disciplined on the river. That's what I've noticed here. Is you got to be very, because I might end up with that deuce on the river with the Queen 4 and say, close my eyes and say my prayers because I got Queen High, I got sausage in my hand, I got one blocker with the deuce, and the Queen. I don't know the Queen. Yeah, that's I wouldn't feel good about it, but
yeah,
feel good about it.
You do need to be disciplined. I have I've done a number of seminars, kind of like crash course into heads up, and I like to lead it off with basically like the thing that always happens to everyone in heads up is your range is weaker than you think. So you're always bluffing more than you're supposed to, and you're never calling as much as you're supposed to. This is like everyone comes to heads up, and this is what happens, right? They don't realize how weak the range is in every spot, so they bluff too much, and they don't realize how weak the range is in every spot, so they fold too much. And this is, so the person who bluffs too much, I guess, ends up winning because the other person folds too much, and it doesn't end up mattering. But this is a very normal outcome, right? It's exactly what the ranges lead us to do if we don't kind of go into the weeds here and figure out the way you're supposed to sort through everything.
So on this river, our bluffs would be diamonds and sixes, and that's probably it. The hand has to probably either have maybe both. They have to have a diamond, at least one diamond in it, or a six.
Yeah,
or a 9-10 maybe. I don't know if it's 9 or 10 matter. I don't know if we're gonna. I mean, because we're gonna have some maybe like 8-9, 8-10. Not very many combos, I guess, though too.
So here,
8-9.
yeah. So here I've clicked on the 0 to 25% equity hand, so you can see all the stuff that's continuing. And yeah, I guess there's like the very rare, absolute nothing hand that's getting here in bluffing. But I would say for the most part, you're right. Like you want to have that interaction with the board. We're using a big bet size. Again, now the range has narrowed a lot. So, having value removal is quite important. So the hands that have a 6 seem to be doing great. Here we probably got the 9 of diamonds. Yeah, we've got these key blocker hands. We got the 9 of diamonds, so we're choosing to bluff. We've got the queen of diamonds, so we're choosing to bluff. We've got the king of diamonds, so we're choosing to bluff, right? Mostly it's those key blockers.
I see. I've been calling them power blockers, and because in PLO, like future blockers is one of the most important concepts, and I don't hear many people talk about it. And there's like the power blocker. The power blocker is something that blocks like 3 hands. That might be like a nut flush blocker on some boards. So in here, it's like an 8 of diamonds. A 6 of diamonds, those to me are 9 of diamonds. Here's real power blockers. You're blocking 9-10, you're blocking 6-9, you're blocking flushes. So that would be something I might consider like my best blocker to have here. And if I have that blocker, I'm basically always bluffing, because unless I have a straight, then I'm betting for value. But that would be kind of like a basic way I might think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really like, and it goes back to what we've been talking about, but just to like drive the point home, when stuff completes, like the 8 of diamonds we were just looking at, a lot of times I am thinking about how do I interact with the stuff that just got there, right? How do I make sure that my opponent doesn't have the stuff that just got there? But when it's a nothing card, when it's like a total blank, I kind of have the opposite mindset. It's like, well, how can I make sure that my opponent got here with trash? Like what's like the weakest way that my opponent could have gotten here? Well, I guess if they had, a combo draw, right? If they had 7x diamonds, 10-8 of diamonds, or queen 10 of diamonds, or something like that. Some of those hands are going to 3-bet pre, but you get the idea. So now it's like, I would expect the 0 equity hands to just be like nothing hands, right? We even give up with 10-9 of diamonds, give up with 9-8 of diamonds, fire it through with 6-4, but we're conservative when we have the diamond. Fire it through with 8-6, but we're conservative when we have the diamond. And always fire it through when we don't have the diamond.
And then would you ever do that same thing you did on the turn, where you might look at what they're folding when we bet, and then you might say, okay, well, we don't have those combos, so those are like our first hands we want to look at to bluff? Exactly,
yeah. It does get a little, it's going to be a little more restricted here, I think, because now we're mostly dealing with suited hands and ace-x combos. So I do think it's a little harder to execute on that, other than just recognizing like what are the lowest equity hands in this range. So this is another good spot to just like switch over to equity view and see like where are all of the whatever 0 to 20% or 0 to 25% hands, because those hands are very unlikely to call. And if there's any commonality here, it's not showing up here, but all I would have to do is exclude diamonds for you to see, oh, a bunch of stuff just disappeared. So we're focused on the diamonds for sure. So, let's include diamonds. Perfect. So you can see there's just a ton of folding happening from the diamonds, 80% of diamonds. Whereas if we uncheck diamonds, it's only 43% of hands. Wow. So we have a pretty clear impact there.
I see. That's why you didn't want to block the diamond, because you want them to maximize the chance that they have the diamond and they're going to fold.
Exactly. Yeah.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's crazy. And then also, you mentioned before with the trainer, you can basically put these in the trainer. If you didn't edit the sizes, you could simulate theoretically all these as well too, which is, I mean, this is like the coolest thing to me, because if I find I don't know how to play, I just go into the trainer and I just run through that spot a bunch and yeah, I just get better at it. I mean, yeah, this is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'll show you one quick trick that I like with the trainer for these types of situations. Yeah, so here, like something I think that gets looked over in the settings of the drills is that you can filter particular types of boards, but not only can you like filter the board, you can filter the run out. So what I was going to say is, like, we've been talking about the difference in barreling rivers where it completes versus rivers where it doesn't complete, right? So you can set, right now I have the board filled out to include the river, but like, let's say we were starting from the turn, I could tell it that the river is going to complete the flush, or I could tell it that the river is not going to complete the flush, right? So I can change the filtering of what rivers I'm going to be dealt so that I can practice how to play my range in like blocked fashion. Like, always, the draw is always going to come in, and then you practice a block of that and then take a break and maybe do another block where the draw is never coming in. And I think that's going to give you a better, it's going to give you better focus on like finding the patterns of what hands are giving up, what hands are bluffing, right? It's going to be a lot easier to track that when you're seeing 50 in a row of flush always coming in, or 50 in a row of whatever, like a board pair, right? If you're looking for patterns in those kind of particular runouts. And you could do that from the turn as well.
You need to write that down. I mean, that's you. I've never done this before. That's actually a really phenomenal idea, just to help you understand. Wow, that's a really good idea. I love that idea a lot. Yeah, I've never done that before.
Nice.
Yeah, that's true, because it will give you, because sometimes you might, I mean, not for me, right? I might play a hand in the trainer and I might not, okay, I bluffed this card, but just practicing all the card. I mean, that's actually a really sick idea. I'm going to start doing that.
Nice. So I want to give some examples just of the ways that you can use the trainer to work on the stuff that Joey and I have been talking about here. As you can see, there's a million ways to set up targeted stuff for heads up cash or for any format, really, any two-player situation in the trainer. But a few ideas from specifically the situations we've been talking about. One thing that I think is really important for anyone who's getting into the game is to work on how they're facing c-bets. So just practicing being in the big blind, practicing facing different sizes of c-bets. I have a couple different ones here that are labeled like facing and called. I'll just show what those two mean. So first, facing c-bet is just a drill that's set up where you're starting from the point where you've called the big blind, you've checked the flop, and you're facing a small size. You got to pick the size to make sure that you're facing aggression. If you just set it up so that you go to the flop and you're playing in the big blind, you're going to play a bunch of spots where it just goes check, check, and then we'll hand over. No fun. So I like to set up different drills for different sizes, and I think the small size is the most important one to train because it's the one you see the most often. So I think this is just like a no-brainer. Practice on facing the small c-bet. You can get dealt all sorts of boards, or you could even throw on filters for which boards you want to see. The other one there that I was showing was for having called that small c-bet, and all that means is we're skipping straight ahead to the turn. Now we know that we had a drill that was just the flop, and we only played the flop street, and I like to isolate that and get really, really good at that. Then I have a separate drill where I've already called. Now I'm playing the rest of the hand. Now I need to get good at what comes next, right? I need to get good at all the different variables. And I don't like to be too prescriptive past the flop. I think just having a drill where you get really, really good at the flop, and then a drill where you practice the rest of the hand from there is a good way to break it up so that you get exposure to everything, but you get extremely good at the thing you're seeing the most often, and then you get that flexible knowledge on the rest of the hand.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, I really like this drill when you sent it to me, where basically we bet, they call, and then we got to decide two barrel or check back, and then play the rest of the hand out. Yeah, that one helped me to really understand my turn a little bit better, and just got to put more volume in that one.
Yeah, so here's exactly what you're talking about, Joey. Like, I have it set up so that you get the chance to practice everything that happens after you've c-bet the flop. So now we're playing from in position. We already c-bet the flop. We need to figure out how to play the rest of the hand. you can build different drills for different flop actions. You could have a drill where it's like, okay, I bet 25%, I got called. Now what? This is going to be different from I bet 67%, I got called. Now what? Right? So depending on what the flop action was, you're going to have different outcomes on future streets. And again, this is one of those things that like, it just gets overlooked and people forget that the way that the rest of the hand is going to play out is significantly different based on the bet sizing changing. So you just get, whatever c-bet size it is that you're using, whatever size you've practiced, whatever size you're using the most often, put that in here directly. That's why it's customizable. And then everything that happens from the turn onward is far more realistic.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, this is one of the drills I've been going to start doing more of too. So would those be the main two you suggest? I mean, I would suggest the pre-flop drill as well too, so that way people who don't even know pre-flop can just work out their pre-flop as well. But I think these two post-flop single raise pot drills are a good way to get started if anyone out there wants to learn how to get better at this one.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think the pre-flop one is great. I don't even have that one saved because it's so simple to set up, right? Like you literally just have any new custom solution starting from pre-flop, it's going to be a heads up solution. So just starting from the first, I'll show you the whole process. Starting from that first node that we had in the pre-flop solution, when you have your pre-flop setup, just practice this spot and it'll take you right there.
Yeah, that's exactly what I do. I practice in position, out of position, calling 3-bets, 4-betting, and from both positions. So I've just done that. I've done that probably 10,000 times plus for all these different spots. Not every spot, but most of the spots. So, well, I played so many hands, I guess every hand you face that. So a lot of the trainers, they just tell you right away if you raised a bad hand, then it doesn't even let you raise that hand. So you naturally practice that if you just play a lot of hands. So
yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. I appreciate the drills, the ideas, the takeaways. I'm definitely going to have to go back and watch this video again and for my own self. And yeah, I've been learning a lot. I appreciate it.
Sweet. I'm glad.
All right. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Me and Kevin go over heads up, no limit hold'em. If you want to check out another video like this one, we talked about poker math every player needs to know. We highly suggest you check that out. Link will be in the description. Hope you enjoyed. Let us know what you thought below. Give us any comments, feedback, input, and we'll be talking with you. So let us know.